48 hours, whatever it was before primary, when your own polls show you're going to lose. It was a dreary day, and we reflected the day, I guess. And we sat there, and I'll tell you, we were depressed. Primary day came. Again, as I recall, dreary weather, early rain. Our attitude hadn't changed very much. That night, precincts were reporting overwhelming Hubert lead, but that quickly turned, and the overwhelming leads by precincts started to turn to Kennedy. And it turned out to be probably the easiest election night I've ever experienced.
Humphrey headquarters in West Virginia. The state that was supposed to stop Kennedy had just given him 61% of the vote and stopped Hubert Humphrey instead.
We'd been out working all day, cold and rainy, and ice and snow, and I got in quite late that evening. And Senator Humphrey came in behind me with some of his Washington aides. And then he walked up very impromptu to a microphone. He started to make his little concession speech saying, "It's over."
Now, I am no longer a candidate for the Democratic presidential nomination. I want to thank all of you, too. You've been very good people.
And I was standing there with the guitar. I wasn't really going to sing any songs or anything like that. Then all at once I looked at him and he looked at me. I thought I saw tears, and I started. I'm going to vote for Hubert Humphrey. I'm going to vote for Hubert Humphrey. I'm going to vote for
Hubert Humphrey. He's the man for you and me. He'll make everybody happy. He'll make everybody happy.
Somewhere around the word happy, I looked in his eyes, and he looked like he was crying, and I just broke down and started crying.
Hey, Jimmy.
And he came over to me and he said, "Oh, that's all right, Jimmy. Everything will be okay, Jimmy." He told me later, he said, "You did my crying for me."
One story ends. One story ends happily.
I want tonight to express my thanks to the people of West Virginia for their fairness, their confidence, and for their support.
That night, it was clear to me that the people of West Virginia had determined the Democratic nominee for President of the United States. And as the dawn broke over West Virginia, and I didn't sleep, I concluded I could identify the next president of the United States.
Give Larry O'Brien an A in prophecy. Come back to the other legacies of our world, to some of the fine print that followed the cover stories of May 1960.
There's fact, and then there's truth. For example, the calendar said it was the 60s, perhaps the biggest cover story of them all, because in spirit, it was still the 50s. Consider how that might have affected stories from 18 days in May and 1 day in April 1960. Because where you are in time spiritually changes where you go from there.
Don't want your love anymore.
Princess Margaret and Anthony Armstrong Jones were divorced in 1978. Television coverage of subsequent royal weddings, live now by satellite, is up close and personal and head-on. And we could hear both Diana Spencer and Sarah Ferguson grapple with the names of their royal grooms.
Take thee, Charles Philip Arthur George.
Take thee, Philip Charles Arthur George.
Take thee, Andrew Albert Christian Edward.
Take thee, Andrew Albert Christian Edward.
The order of the 4th Judicial District Court of the state of Utah has been carried out. Gary Mark Gilmore is dead.
Like Chessman and others, the protest have stopped nothing. But many states have replaced electric chairs and gas chambers with the lethal injection table and called it progress.
Do you plead guilty to the charges listed?
Yes, I plead guilty.
Francis Gary Powers was convicted of spying by a Soviet court and sentenced to 10 years in prison. In 1962, he was exchanged for Rudolf Abel, a Soviet spy, in Berlin. Powers, who became a TV helicopter reporter in Los Angeles and died in a crash in 1977, will be awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross posthumously next fall. After the summit conference failed, Ambassador Henry Cabot Lodge accused the Soviets of bugging our embassy in Moscow. This year, the Soviets have apparently bugged the new American embassy as it was being built, and they say that their buildings in this country are nests of bugs.
A few months ago, I told the American people I did not trade arms for hostages. My heart and my best intentions still tell me that's true, but the facts and the evidence tell me it is not.
Cover stories are still coming apart, and presidents are still taking the rap when they have run out of options.
Let me say first that I accept the nomination of the Democratic Party.
John Fitzgerald Kennedy would be the cover story of the year, and Jimmy Wolford would cover his bets. Words were easier to change than tunes anyway.
I'm going to vote for John Kennedy. Going to vote for John Kennedy. I'm going to vote for John Kennedy. He's the man for you and me.
Well, there it is the way it was in May of 1960. During that period, an American defector named Lee Harvey Oswald was working in a radio and TV factory in Minsk. Oswald became as disenchanted with the Soviet Union as he was with the United States, came back to this country, and on a November day in 1963, snuffed out John Kennedy's life and Camelot, and maybe our national purpose. Kennedy began the Peace Corps, prodded us toward the moon, aroused our conscience on civil rights. That probably didn't add up to a national purpose, but it gave us something to look forward to besides microwave popcorn or a new Toyota.
I've said it before, and I'll say it again. Historian Will Durant wrote that civilization is a stream with banks. A stream filled with people killing, stealing, shouting, and doing things historians record, while on the banks, unnoticed, people build homes, make love, raise children, sing songs, even write poetry. He said the story of civilization is the story of what happened on the banks. I offer, as proof he's right, my favorite play, a little seemingly unimportant thing called The Fantastics. Barely a story, much less a cover story, when it opened that May of 1960. But while Eisenhower, Khrushchev, Powers, Presley, Kennedy, Humphrey, the 60s, the 70s, and more than half the 80s are long gone, The Fantastics is still around, still at the Sullivan Street Playhouse, 27 years, May 1987, the longest-running play in America. But then The Fantastics is about what happens on the banks. It's nice to remember. And so it goes. Also during that 18 days in May and 1 day in April 1960,
the U.S. nuclear submarine Triton completed an underwater trip around the world. It took 84 days.
The Soviet Union launched a 5-ton space satellite with a dummy cosmonaut aboard.
Lunch counters at 6 department stores and variety stores in Nashville were desegregated after 3 months of sit-in demonstrations and boycotts.
Philanthropist John D. Rockefeller, Jr. died. In his lifetime, he had given away $475 million.
Prince Ali Khan, playboy and diplomat, was killed in an auto accident near Paris. He was 48.
The average price of an appendectomy in Cleveland was $137.50.
For a transcript of this broadcast, send $3 to Our World Transcripts, 2 John Street, New York, New York, 10038.
For the Our World Viewer Guide, write to Community Relations, ABC, 1330 Avenue of the Americas, New York, New York, 10019.